Picture this. You inherit the largest empire in medieval Europe. Your lands stretch from Ireland to the Pyrenees. You're literally sitting on a goldmine of power, prestige, and political influence. Now imagine losing almost all of it in just 15 years because you couldn't stop being well yourself. Meet King John of England, the medieval master of disaster, the Sultan of screw-ups, the absolute king of losing kingdoms. And today, we're breaking down exactly how one man managed to transform from Europe's most powerful monarch into history's biggest punchline. But before we dive into this spectacular train wreck of royal proportions, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because trust me, you're going to want front row seats to every chaotic episode we drop. History's disasters wait for no one, and neither should you. Let's set the scene. It's 1166, and baby John Plantagenet pops into the world as the youngest son of Henry II. Now, most medieval kings got cool nicknames like the Lionheart or the Great. John? He got Lackland. His own father basically named him the kid who won't inherit anything. And honestly, that should have been our first red flag. When your medieval nickname literally means propertyless. Maybe, just maybe, you're not destined for greatness. But did anyone listen? Of course not. Henry II had 4 sons, and John was supposed to be the spare. Think of him as medieval insurance that nobody wanted to use. But here's the thing about medieval politics. People die. A lot. And suddenly, our boy Lackland was looking at a crown. So Richard the Lionheart becomes king and immediately decides, you know what sounds fun? Leaving my kingdom to go fight in the Holy Land for several years. Classic Richard move. And who does he leave in charge of keeping England from falling apart? His loving, trustworthy brother, John. Now, a normal person might think, great. My brother trusts me with his entire kingdom. I should probably not mess this up. But John's brain immediately goes to, how can I use this opportunity to steal everything? While Richard was busy being all noble and crusade-wise in Jerusalem, John was back home making deals with Richard's enemies, plotting coups, and basically trying to convince everyone that his brother was probably dead anyway. So why not just make John king? The best part? When Richard found out, he still forgave John. Because apparently, Richard was too busy fighting Saladin to properly deal with his backstabbing little brother. Big mistake, Dick. Big mistake. Okay, so Richard dies, probably from an infected crossbow wound, because medieval medicine was basically rub some herbs on it and pray. And suddenly, we have a succession crisis. The crown should go to Arthur of Brittany, John's 16-year-old nephew. Arthur's got the better claim. He's got popular support, and he's got the backing of the French king. Arthur also had one tiny problem. Uncle John really wanted that crown. In 1203, John captures Arthur during a siege. Arthur's taken to Rouen Castle and then, well, he just disappears. Poof, gone. Vanished into medieval thin air. Now, John's official story was basically shrugs. I don't know. He just left? But medieval chroniclers were a bit more creative with their theories. Some said John stabbed Arthur in a drunken rage. Others claimed he had him thrown off a castle wall. The most dramatic version as John personally drowning Arthur in the same river. Whatever happened, Arthur was never seen again, and suddenly John's path to the throne was suspiciously clear. Coincidence? In medieval politics, there are no coincidences, only very convenient accidents. So John's got his crown, possibly through fraternal betrayal and probable nephew murder. And he's thinking, you know what? I'm on a roll. Let me pick a fight with the most powerful institution in medieval Europe, the Catholic Church. The trouble started with picking a new Archbishop of Canterbury. The Church wanted their guy, John wanted his guy, and Pope Innocent III, who was basically the medieval equivalent of a final boss, was having none of John's nonsense. Here's where John's political genius really shines. Instead of finding a compromise like a normal person, he decides to just steal all the church's property in England. All of it. Monasteries, cathedrals, that little chapel your grandmother likes. John's tax collectors showed up and basically said, "This belongs to the king now." Innocent III's response was swift and devastating. England got slapped with an interdict. No church services, no marriages, no baptisms, no last rites. For 6 years, England was basically excommunicated from Christianity. Imagine being so annoying that the Pope essentially puts your entire kingdom in religious timeout. That takes talent. Now we come to John's masterpiece of military incompetence, losing Normandy. Remember, John inherited lands from Ireland to the Pyrenees. The French territories weren't just nice to have. They were the crown jewels of the Plantagenet Empire. Philip Augustus of France had been eyeing English territories in France for years, just waiting for the right moment to pounce. And John handed him that moment on a silver platter with a side of "Please invade us." The writing was on the wall when John lost the crucial fortress of Chateau Galliard in 1204. This wasn't just any castle. It was Richard the Lionheart's supposedly impregnable masterpiece, designed to keep the French out of Normandy forever. But here's the thing about forever. It's a lot shorter when you're dealing with John's military strategy, which seemed to consist of panic, retreat, and blame someone else. Within months, Normandy fell, then Anjou, then Maine. John went from controlling half of France to controlling, well, basically just England and some increasingly nervous barons who were starting to wonder if they'd backed the wrong horse. In just 5 years, John managed to lose territories that his family had held for generations. Territories that had made England a European superpower. Gone. All of it. Losing half your empire is expensive, turns out. All those failed military campaigns to win back French territories don't pay for themselves. So John did what any rational medieval king would do. He taxed his subjects into the ground. We're not talking about reasonable taxation here. We're talking about John inventing new taxes faster than a desperate medieval accountant. There was scutage, a tax instead of military service. There were arbitrary fines for basically everything. John once fined a man for pleasing the king too little. I'm not making this up. But John's real innovation was personal extortion disguised as royal justice. Powerful barons would suddenly find themselves facing trumped-up charges, with the only way out being massive payments to the crown. One baron, William de Brieux, ended up fleeing to Ireland because John demanded 40,000 marks, roughly equivalent to millions of dollars today, as surety for his loyalty. When William couldn't pay, John allegedly had his wife and son starved to death in a dungeon. Nothing says, beloved monarch, quite like starving your nobles' families to death for money. By 1214, John had achieved something remarkable. He'd managed to unite all his enemies against him. The church hated him. The French king wanted him gone. But most importantly, his own barons, the powerful nobles who were supposed to support the crown, were ready to rebel. See, medieval kingship was basically a protection racket. The king protected his barons from external threats, and in return, they provided military service and taxes. But John had failed spectacularly at the protection part, while cranking the tax part up to 11. The final straw came at the Battle of Bouvines in 1214. John had assembled a massive coalition, English, German, and Flemish forces, to finally defeat Philip Augustus and win back his French territories. This was supposed to be his comeback moment, his chance to prove he deserved the crown. Instead, it was a complete disaster. John's coalition was crushed, his allies scattered, and any hope of regaining his French empire died on that battlefield. When news reached England, the barons had heard enough. They'd supported John through his disasters, paid his extortionate taxes, and watched him lose their ancestral lands in France. But losing a war he promised to win, that was the final humiliation. June 15th, 1215. Runnymede, one of the most famous documents in English history, gets signed, and John looks about as happy as someone getting a root canal from a medieval dentist. The Magna Carta wasn't just any old piece of parchment. It was essentially the barons saying, "John, you've been such a terrible king that we're literally writing down rules to stop you from being terrible anymore. No more arbitrary imprisonment. That's aimed at you, John. No more excessive fines. Looking at you again, John. Due process of law, because apparently we need to explain basic fairness to our king." The document contained 63 clauses, and pretty much every single one was designed to prevent John from doing something he'd already done. It was like a medieval restraining order against royal tyranny. Think of it as history's first terms and conditions agreement. Except instead of clicking, "I agree," John had to sign it while surrounded by armed barons who were politely suggesting that not signing might result in him not having a kingdom anymore. But here's the kicker. John never had any intention of actually following the Magna Carta. The ink was barely dry before he was writing to the Pope, asking him to declare the whole thing invalid. Normal kings might have thought, you know what? Maybe I should try being a better ruler. But John's takeaway from Runnymede was apparently, these barons need to be taught a lesson about respecting royal authority. Within months of signing the Magna Carta, John was at war with his own barons. He hired foreign mercenaries because nothing says legitimate English king like paying French soldiers to kill English nobles. The barons, meanwhile, made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. They invited a foreign prince to become their king. Louis, son of Philip Augustus of France, landed in England with an army in 1216. Let that sink in. John had become so universally hated that his own subjects preferred to be ruled by the son of their traditional enemy rather than put up with John for one more day. For a brief moment, it looked like the Plantagenet dynasty was finished. French forces controlled London. Most of the English nobility had switched sides, and John was reduced to fleeing from castle to castle with his dwindling supporters. England was tearing itself apart, and it was all because one man couldn't stop being the worst version of himself. October 1216. John is fleeing north through the English countryside when he stops at Newark Castle. He's sick, he's exhausted, and his kingdom's falling apart around him. And then, in a move that was peak John timing, he dies. Now, the official cause was dysentery, which is medieval speak for really unpleasant stomach problems. But some chroniclers suggested he might have been poisoned by a monk at Swinstead Abbey. Given John's track record with making enemies, it's honestly surprising it took this long for someone to try. But here's what makes John's death so perfectly John. He died just when things were about to get interesting. The Civil War was at its climax. Louis of France was claiming the English throne, and the future of England hung in the balance. John's 9-year-old son Henry was suddenly king, and England's fate rested in the hands of a child and his regents. The baronial rebellion that John had caused would continue for years, nearly destroying the kingdom he tried so hard to keep. Even in death, John managed to leave behind a mess for other people to clean up. It's almost impressive in its consistency. So there you have it, King John's 10-step masterclass in how to lose an empire. In just 15 years, he managed to transform England from a European superpower into a war-torn kingdom fighting for its survival. But here's the thing about John, he wasn't just unlucky. This wasn't a case of bad timing or circumstances beyond his control. Every single one of these disasters was a direct result of John's choices. His paranoia, his greed, his complete inability to understand that being king meant serving your kingdom, not just exploiting it. When John inherited the throne, he controlled territories from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. When he died, England was being invaded by the French. London was under foreign control, and his nobles had literally tried to replace him with an enemy prince. Medieval chroniclers called him the worst king England ever had, and honestly, after going through his greatest hits, it's hard to argue with their assessment. John's reign was a masterpiece of self-destruction, a case study in how personal flaws can destroy even the mightiest empires. He had every advantage: wealth, power, military strength, strategic position, and he threw it all away because he couldn't stop being petty, paranoid, and cruel. But perhaps most tragically, John's failures didn't just hurt him. They hurt everyone. Thousands died in his wars. The kingdom was torn apart by civil conflict, and England's position in Europe was permanently weakened. Now, you might be thinking, surely no English king could top John's spectacular incompetence. And for about 300 years, you'd be right. English monarchs learned from John's mistakes, ruled more wisely, and generally avoided completely destroying their kingdoms. But then came a king who decided that John's problem wasn't that he'd been too destructive. It was that he hadn't been creative enough with his destruction. Meet Henry VIII, a man who looked at John's record of betraying family members, fighting the church, and tearing England apart, and thought, hold my mead. Where John had one failed marriage, Henry had 6 wives and significantly reduced life expectancy for anyone who said, I do. Where John fought the Pope, Henry broke with Rome entirely and founded his own church. And where John's personal dramas nearly destroyed one kingdom, Henry's love life almost brought down all of Europe. From secret marriages to public executions, from religious revolution to international intrigue, Henry VIII's romantic disasters make John's family issues look like a minor disagreement at Sunday dinner. So join us next time as we dive into the story of how one king's search for true love and a male heir nearly brought the Tudor dynasty crashing down around him. Because if you thought losing an empire was bad, wait until you see what happens when raw romance goes medieval. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because trust me, Henry VIII's drama makes John look positively restrained, and you won't want to miss a single scandalous second of it. Until next time, remember, history is a hot mess, but at least it's educational. Thanks for watching History's Hot Mess, where the past gets messy.